Hello everybody, my name is Ray. Welcome to the Evangelical Dark Web. Today we'll be debunking a Relevant magazine article. It's been a while since I've tore into a Big Eva article, and this time Relevant magazine gets the honors. And this article, and let me pull up the title, is called Dear Christians, Stop Using Woke as an Insult. And to that I say no. And just picture Bugs Bunny saying that in the famous meme, no. So that's my response in short, but obviously we're going to dive into some of the arguments that it makes and we're going to have fun. But first, quick announcement. If you're not already subscribed to the Evangelical Dark Web, subscribe to the channel and also check out evangelicaldarkweb.org. And you're going to want to subscribe to that because I have sunken my teeth into some more docent research group. And I got some stories that are coming up on that. We're going to be exposing some of the people that use it. And particularly, just diving into what that influence looks like. So that'll be exciting. Because it's pretty funny because I found someone that was blurting out the clients that use docent research groups. So, because of that, I got some leads on some stories, and that's what I'm going to be writing about, possibly on Sunday, but definitely next week's. So that's what you have to look forward to. If you are a subscriber of Evangelical Dark Web, you will get those notifications. So become one. Back to the issue at hand. Christians stop using woke as an insult. It's written by Tyler Huckabee, who I believe is a senior editor at Relevant magazine. Now, Relevant magazine, if you are unaware, is pretty much a charismatic magazine. I would say they're woke just from what I've seen, but obviously I'm not like a hyper charismatic or anything, so I don't read Relevant magazine. And rarely have I ever done the honors of debunking one of their articles. It's usually Gospel Coalition or Christianity Today, occasionally the RLC, but today, Relevant magazine. Oh, and SBC Voices. Who can forget that woke publication? Oh no, I'm already disobeying Tyler Huckabee's request to not use woke as an insult. My bad. So this article starts off by addressing the David Platt situation, and that was my last video, was on David Platt and how certain members of his congregation have filed a complaint in court basically seeking to nullify the election results because they violate the election itself. Having a do-over election was in violation of the church's bylaws. And I talked about that in the last video, and this video is not going to focus on that. Instead, it's going to focus on the arguments that Tyler Huckabee makes here. It's hard to say exactly when woke became a pejorative used by Christians to cudgel their fellow believers into line and smear ideologies, but it's been an ugly evolution. It was not all that long ago that the word was mostly used to describe a certain social awareness, often around racial issues. These days, it's a derisive and amorphous term that's used to bully anyone perceived to be more socially or politically liberal than you are. That's made woke an extremely popular insult, but also an insultingly brainless one. It's a huge label that can be easily slapped on anything the user doesn't want to be intellectually anything that the user doesn't want to intellectually or critically engage. I think there's a grammatical error there. Conversations around race and gender are complicated and require compassion, study, and empathy to be effective. But I don't have to do that if I can just label you woke. I can put you in that box and not have to think about you or the substance that you actually think. So let's break down that first sentence. It's hard to say when exactly woke became a pejorative used by Christians to cudgel their fellow believers into line and smear ideologies. Now, I got to do a pause right there because If you're woke, I don't really consider you a Christian because you're not acting like a Christian. So, if you're a woke pastor like David Platt, I consider you an enemy within the church. That is what you are. That is what you should be considered as. An enemy within the church. Whether you are unsaved or not necessarily for me to judge. But obviously, if you're partaking in false teaching and leading people astray, the determining factor is really whether you're Peter going along with the Galatian heresy or whether you are actively promoting it. But the difference between Peter in this instance is that Paul calls Peter out because he didn't really believe in this heresy. He was just going along with those who did, because Paul notes that he was eating with Gentiles and stuff like that. So that's the difference between someone who is going along with a heresy and someone who's promoting a heresy. And it's hard to see who exactly is going along with it because there's a lot more of the latter, people that are promoting it. So, and another thing to bring up is who has been falsely accused of being woke? Who? Al Mohler? No, I don't. I think that was pretty valid. He's hired woke professors. He's fired Christian professors. I think that one's pretty valid. Tim Keller, obvious. Anyone at the Gospel Coalition, that is fair game because they actively and obviously promote critical race theory at the Gospel Coalition. ERLC, fair game as well because of the same reasons as the Gospel Coalition. Danny Akin, yeah, I'd say he's the most woke of the Southern Baptist Seminary presidents, and for much of the same reasons as Al Mohler and beyond. Who's being falsely accused of being woke? John Piper, who basically claimed that critical race theory isn't actually taught in the church. That John Piper, the John Piper that said, you can't actually teach it within the church because it's an atheist and materialistic philosophy, which, again, I already did a video on that stupidity by John Piper, but, again, he's woke as well. Who's being falsely labeled woke? And the thing is, they don't like when people call them woke because they are woke. They don't like to be identified. These are theological liberals, except unlike in the olden days, they don't want to admit it. They don't want to admit their liberalism because that sends up all the red flags. And that sends someone like a Sam Albury to a Matthew Vines quick if he admits that. So, he treats it like, oh, these people care about the issue of race, so therefore they're labeled woke. And that's not true. That's not true. It's not people that talk about race that are called woke. It's people that are using underlying cultural Marxist assumptions that are called woke. And again, these are easy to identify. If you can understand what Marxism is, what classical Marxism is, you can understand what cultural Marxism is. And if you can understand what cultural Marxism is, you can understand what critical race theory is. It's not that difficult. This isn't rocket science. This isn't brain surgery. This is really basic philosophy and just a history of worldviews and political science. It's not that difficult. So woke is an extremely popular insult, but I would disagree that it is an insultingly brainless one. Again, he thinks that it's easily slapped. I don't think I've seen woke be wrongfully slapped yet. Comment below if you have, and maybe I'll argue with you in the comments section. Be like, no, that was pretty valid. But if you think that critical race theory can be used as an analytical tool, odds are you're woke. At a minimum, you're compromised. And I think the label woke is fair and valid. So he talks about how we need to have compassion. And again, this circles back to what he said in the beginning, that it's being pejorative used to cudgel fellow believers. And again, I don't view people like Beth Moore as fellow believers. I do not view people like David Platt as fellow believers. I don't view people like J.D. Greer, Ed Litton as fellow believers. They are enemies within the church. That is how they should be viewed. Moving on. So that's why we need to retire woke from the church lexicon of put-downs. I'd like to know what else is on that list of put-downs. I guess he probably also has liberal on there. As an insult, the word has become so broad that it's useless. I disagree with that. And so mean-spirited that it's no helpful conversation can spring from its well. It's especially tragic when you consider the revolutionary origins of the word among Black Americans. And I'm not going to read the whole part, but basically it goes into how this term made a huge resurrection during the 2014 Black Lives Matter movement, where they tried to lie about Michael Brown's death. Michael Brown was justifiably shot because he tried to attack a police officer after he mugged his fellow man. So I don't have any sympathy for that death. He got what was coming to him. And that's where the term woke really made a huge comeback. And he's right about that. That's not necessarily where the term originated, but that's where it made a huge resurgence. And Black Lives Matter was culturally Marxist then, and it's culturally Marxist now. That hasn't changed. That hasn't changed. Going back to the idea of using it as an insult, it works as an insult. Why? Because cultural Marxists are not up for debate. Because they will always dance around positions. We have seen so much of Jarvis Williams trying to say, I never taught critical race theory. And he's a professor at Southern Baptist Theological Seminary under Al Mohler. And he's trying to claim that, I've denounced critical race theory, despite the fact that he has a very well-documented history of teaching it, of writing about it. And the fact that all these people are trying to retcon their own history with regards to critical race theory. That also includes Southern Baptist Theological Seminary Provost Matthew Hall, who's trying to retcon his past support, his past very public support of critical race theory, and how he called himself a white supremacist because he was white, and said that he had the sin of racism. Now, I want to highlight this part. Woke also got appropriated by a more broadly liberal movement, really appropriated, shedding some of its racial justice connotations and becoming more of a general aim. You mean like cultural Marxist? This is where the trouble really begins. Woke started popping up on signs in the Women's March and at protests of former President Donald Trump, a liberal call sign that flattened edges and ripened it to be appropriated by bullies who would use it just as broadly but to different ends. Okay, so this is kind of like the term social justice warrior. Are you familiar with that term? Of course you are if you've been on the internet and not under a rock. So the term social justice warrior is kind of like the term woke, where it was used affirmatively by the people who called themselves social justice warriors. They were using that term affirmatively. And then it got co-opted by the opposition as a pejorative. And the thing is, these people don't like necessarily being identified as woke labels. They don't like being called social justice warriors as soon as it becomes a point of shame. These are emotional people. They are driven by emotion, not logic. So when you insult them with pejorative labels, they don't like that. They don't like that. That's why we should be doing it. Because they don't like that. So let me read this quote before I double down on that point that I just made. In my conservative Southern Baptist community, the term has become an insult that is used against anyone who is concerned about justice and racism. And this is a Karen Swallow Pryor quote, a professor of English and Christianity and culture at Southeastern Baptist Theological Seminary. And she told this to Vox, the very liberal publication that set off an adpocalypse on YouTube a few years ago because they don't like free speech. So Karen Swallow Prior, let's actually talk about her. She is more woke on race than, guess who? Preston freaking Sprinkle, who's one of the very pro-gay the pro-gay, let's subvert biblical sexuality movement. Preston Sprinkle is a part of that, and she's actually more woke than him on that issue. I believe there's a woke preacher clip that had the two of them together, and he's just kind of taken aback by how woke she is on the issue of race. And she also subverted biblical sexuality when she endorsed the Revoice Conference. She is a theological liberal and a heretic. She's a heretic. And I have no problem calling Karen Swallow Prior a heretic. And she's quoted in this article about how she's a conservative Southern Baptist. And she's not. She's a frickin' liberal. And no quarter for these people. And guess what? Karen Swallow Prior is woke, and I have no problem using that label pejoratively to refer to her. Because going back to what I was saying, it is an insult because cultural Marxists are not logical. They are emotional. They do not respond to debate. They do not respond to discord. They do not respond to winsome people like Kevin DeYoung, who labored hard to not appear as woke, but ultimately was still called a white supremacist. So, and I don't think Kevin DeYoung's one of the bad guys, but, you know, he is in the industry. He is Big Eva, but I don't think he's one of the bad guys. But that being said, he's one of those people, Denny Burke's another one, I would say, that wants to fight for the church in a very winsome way, and that doesn't work. These people don't respond to debate. They only respond to a few things. One is the fist. They respond to force. They respond to pain. The only good communist is a dead communist. That is true. That is a fact, because there's no such thing as a good communist. So they respond to pain. The other thing they respond, and I guess one way to inflict pain is through pejorative insults. Because these are emotional people. And the other, they need to be punished in order to be defeated. You're not going to come up with a big zing in a debate. The purpose of using discourse is not necessarily to change the other side, but to change the audience watching the discourse, to dissuade them from going down the woke path. But as far as the woke goes, they respond to pain. They respond to being kicked out of ministry. They respond to Overture 23 of the Presbyterian Church in America, this past General Assembly. They respond to punishment. They respond to being outed. They respond to exposure. That is what they respond to. They don't respond to debate. They don't respond to winsome conversation. They only respond to pain. And that doesn't necessarily mean physical pain. But they respond to action, and they respond to emotionalism. And because these are emotional people. So when you call them woke, that hurts their feelings, and they don't like it. They don't want to be categorized in an honest fashion. These are people who delve in lies. Other communities may still find uses for woke that don't denote exhaustion, as woke will continue to evolve. But using woke as an insult is utterly backwards for Christians. At absolute best, it's lazy way of dismissing people perceived as being too liberal. At worst, it's an attempt to defend the status quo and silence anyone striving towards racial justice. In any case, it's Christians, grammar mistake there, appropriating and empowering important word from black culture and twisting it into a weapon. Such behavior is inexcusable and lamentable. This guy's a clown. Oh no, white people are stealing black culture things. Gee. You're basically woke, or you're basically racist if you're using woke as a pejorative because you're appropriating an important word from black culture. Really? That's an important word from black culture? Get out of here. And then you're saying it's lamentable? And lament is not in reference to the book of Lamentations in Scripture. It's actually a woke buzzword for lamenting. It's an emotional thing where you have to lament people's perceived suffering. And I'm not about doing that. I'll be honest. Christians should be able to talk about these things seriously, charitably, and honestly. That often means elevating our language above the easiest, broadest vocabulary to find something more exact, specific, and true. This guy does not like Oxford commas. I'm pretty anal about Oxford commas, in case you've ever read my writing. The next time you're tempted to accuse someone of being woke, I'll accuse you of being woke, Tyler Huckabee, because, dude, you just basically implied that using such a word is racist. The next time you're tempted to accuse someone of being woke, take a minute to figure out what your actual issue is with them. Not only will this lead to a more profitable discussion, it might challenge you to reconsider some of your own disagreements. Woke is hardly the only word to suffer this fate. It's not even the only word lifted from black vernacular. Cancel culture, critical race theory, and even liberal itself have all become bludgeons used to box people up and label them and dismiss them out of consideration. If your goal is effective conversation leading to more unity, it's hard to imagine a worse way of going about it. But if you're just looking to claim victory in a culture war, well, it's not a bad strategy. And when you win a culture war, that's all you win. Actually, it's a pretty effective strategy at fighting for the church. Because, let's face it, if you're, say, trying to hire a pastor, right? If you're in a situation like Florida, First Baptist Church, Naples, Florida, that is a great example of this, where they had to communicate why Marcus Hayes was an unacceptable and unqualified nominee for their senior pastor position. Using words like liberal and woke are easy ways that everyone understands to do it. So he wants to elevate our language. Let me explain in elevated language why woke is something that Christians should be using pejoratively. And the reason is that the term woke is a colloquial vernacular. And because it is a colloquial vernacular, not bogged down in academic vocabulary, it is effective in use, in argumentation, in a culture war, in spiritual warfare. And, how about I just say that in a more colloquial way? Relegating my language, I guess, would be the way to phrase that. The easiest, broadest vocabulary, meaning words that people, everyday people, the plebs, as he would call them, understand. Words that everyday people understand. Those are words we should be using in our argumentation, in our culture war, in our spiritual warfare, in defense of the church. We should be using words everyday people can understand. Let's not get bogged down in academics. If you can understand Marxism, you can understand cultural Marxism. And if you can understand cultural Marxism, you understand critical race theory. This isn't hard. This isn't rocket science. This isn't brain science. And Tyler Huckabee here is trying to convince you to lay down a very effective weapon that you have in spiritual warfare. He wants you to neuter your own attack. He wants you to neuter your own tactics because they work. They work. Ed Litton has been exposed in part because people called him woke. And that's what led to a lot of this digging that's uncovered a lot of the issues surrounding him and his ministry. And it's effective. David Platt is in trouble in his own church because labels like woke were used against him. I could go on with more examples of this, but I think my point has been clear. Now, let me know what you think about what I think in the comments section below. My name is Ray. That's all I got to say about this for today. If you like this kind of content, like the video and also subscribe to the channel. I know I mentioned that earlier in the video. And also check out evangelicaldarkweb.org, linked in the description below. Again, my name is Ray, and I will catch you on the next one. Have a blessed day.